In this lesson, we'll learn how we can adjust the articulation points for our deformer bones on our character. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, in between lessons, I went ahead and I rigged the left leg as well as the left arm. And so before we start talking about how we can adjust articulation points, I just want to demonstrate how this leg can also move. So just making sure I have the leg 2 deformation layer selected in my layers section, and using my transform tool, I can very easily just kick that leg out. Again, it's rotating around that offset point. We can take the bone that we have for the lower leg, and you can see how it's just rotating around that articulation point. And if we zoom in, just hitting 2 on our keyboard, we can just see how really nice that looks. Actually looks great. And again, this is just a solid drawing, just as we've talked about in previous lessons. And it's really the power of the deformers that allow us to just bend and move them around. It saves you a lot of time in just the overall initial design of your character, not having to break it down into as many pieces. So we don't have the upper and lower leg divided into separate pieces on separate layers. Okay. Another thing I want to talk to you just about really quick before we start talking about articulation points. As you can see, the more deformer bones that you begin to apply here on our character, or any character really, you can see how it can start to become really cluttered as you continue to rig your character with deformers. And so if you want to just focus on one area and just completely hide all the other deformer bones, you can very easily do that. So we're actually going to want to focus on just this arm right here, his right arm, as we get ready to adjust the articulation point. And so if I don't want to see any of those other deformer bones, I can simply come up here to our deformation toolbar, and making sure I have that set of deformation bones, basically that deformation arm 1 layer selected, I can hit this button right here, and it'll just show that selected set of deformers, and it'll hide all the others. So just go ahead and click on that. You can see how we're just focused on the deformer bones for his right arm. So you may find that really useful, especially if you've just got a lot going on. It's getting really muddy. Okay. All right, so as you recall, if we rotate this arm, you can see how it's becoming a little bit jagged right there. What that basically is a result of is the drawing is being sliced up right here at this elbow area, and it's based off of the radius of this little articulation point, basically this little circle right here that we're using to signify as his elbow. Okay, so let's kind of talk about how we can basically just kind of start to smooth that out. So to kind of demonstrate this a little bit better, what I'd like to do is for this deformation arm layer, let's go ahead and set a keyframe. So I'm just clicking on that little plus button right there, that little KF plus button for our timeline toolbar. And let's go ahead and come out here in time. And I'm just going to grab this bone right here for the upper arm. Let's rotate it back. And then we'll go ahead and rotate this lower arm bone, okay? So we got a little bit of animation going on. I wanted to kind of do a little bit of animating here just so you can probably see it a little bit easier. And so again, we're seeing that jaggedness right there. And so what we want to go ahead and do is making sure we have that deformation layer selected. We want to come back up here and click on Setup Mode. Okay, so this basically, again, takes us back to the original state in which we rigged the arm. And again, as I mentioned before, setup mode is really important. You want to engage that when you initially rig any drawing layer, because then you have the option to come back to it and make any kind of adjustments. Now, before we adjust this articulation point, what we want to go ahead and do is hit this button right here. This is another button that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's just called Show All Manipulators. So we can see basically the position in which our arm is in on this particular frame, and you can see that it's in green right there, showing that. Okay, and you can also see the size of the articulation point for that animatable position of the arm. Okay, so what we want to go ahead and do is we can basically, using our transform tool in setup mode, we can hover over this little diamond right here, and we can start to size up the articulation right there, okay? Now, if we go ahead and exit setup mode, it takes us back to that position that we had on that frame right there, okay? And you can see how it started to smooth out a lot more, just looking a lot nicer. So we can go back into setup mode, maybe increase the radius just a little bit more. And you can see how that just looks a lot better, okay? So that's definitely a really useful feature with the deformer tools. Again, all exclusive to Harmony. And so it's another great feature in that, again, you don't have to worry about dividing up the arm into multiple pieces. And if you get any kind of jaggedness, you can easily smooth it out. So it's another reason not having to divide that arm up, break it up into separate pieces when you're basically building your character in the character design phase. All right. So really cool stuff. Now, if we go ahead and take our little red indicator right here, a timeline indicator, and we scrub back, you can see how the initial state of the arm, it looks a little bit different than it originally does in its rest pose. In fact, we can see the difference by going into setup mode. So on this frame, we'll want to go ahead, making sure we have the deformation arm layer selected. We'll hit this button once again to copy the resting pose to the animatable pose. Okay. And now we can kind of scrub through. We can see just how nice and seamless that looks. And if these are looking a little bit distracting, you can go ahead and unselect the Show All Manipulators button. Okay? So really cool stuff. Really, really neat. Now, another thing that you can do, in fact, let's go ahead and come down here and try this out on the leg. We're going to go ahead and find our, let's try this out on our right leg as well. So it's right there. Okay. And again, we can hit this button to switch over to that. And I'll go ahead and set a keyframe. We'll kind of do the same kind of process. Okay. Let's bring that leg out. Kind of kick it out like so. It's got a little bit of animation there. He's probably dancing. Okay, and so again, this doesn't really look that bad. In fact, I probably wouldn't try to adjust the articulation point on that knee, really. I don't think it'd be anything that you would notice. But again, you can do the same thing. We can go into setup mode, and let's go ahead and hide that hand while we're at it. And you can come into setup mode. Again, using your transform tool, you can grab that little diamond right there, and maybe just bring it out a little bit outside the perimeter of the line work for the leg. You can exit setup mode, and you might want to see just kind of what that does right there. If it feels like it's not working, then don't do it. Again, we have kind of a rounded shape right there that is actually working pretty nice. But if you want a little bit more control, there's a button right here that by default it'll be suppressed, and it's basically showing just the simplified manipulators. We can go ahead and click on it again, and you can see how we've got some different controls in here where we can basically kind of adjust the overall curve of kind of the leg right there. So we can kind of play with that as well. If it's feeling a little bit kind of off, kind of a little bit pinched right there, you can maybe kind of adjust the overall curve right there and just kind of see how that looks. So if it was feeling a little bit too pointed right there, you could kind of use that feature as well to kind of adjust it. And again, on that first frame right there, I'm just going to make sure I have that leg selected and just basically do the same thing. I'll go ahead and come up here and hit this button to kind of copy the original state in which we rigged that leg. And let's go ahead now and bring back up that hand again, the rest of his body there. Now, obviously, the hands and the feet are not following along, and that's basically for the same reason that we had with our tentacle space monster, is that we haven't come into the network view yet and set up a hierarchy arrangement for those to follow along. So basically in this lesson, I just wanted to kind of show you how you could very quickly and very easily come up into these articulation points and just kind of adjust them to where they're really nice and smooth like that. So you don't have any kind of jaggedness or anything like that. So another reason to use Toon Boom Harmony and use the deformers that are exclusive to this application, again, saves you so much time in having to otherwise divide up this arm into separate pieces and worry about how you want to design that joint when you're building the character, and worrying about if there'll be any information that's going to poke out because of the way you designed it. All right. So in our next lesson, we're going to talk about adding basically some additional modules to our deformers here. Now, we've actually already come into the module library previously and went to the deformation tab when we wanted to add an additional curve. If you recall from the lesson where we were adding those curves for our tentacle on our tentacle monster, we were basically able to pull one of these into our network view. So we're going to talk about how we can use a couple of additional modules down here and kind of see some of the effects they have when used in conjunction with our deformer bones. So stick around and we'll tackle that in our next lesson.